Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
So Carrie will not be joining us tonight. She's not feeling well, so we'll just-
All right.
as far as the planning department goes.
Hey, John, this is Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes, Christine, we can.
Yeah, so I think it would be useful if you put my correct name in the box up there.
Okay.
Thanks.
You have to hold this, Stephen. I can't.
I have to look at myself.
Yeah.
Not here. Get some books to prop it up. Give me those big water glass bottle.
Let's see, John. Looks like we have the board here. So should we get started?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. If everyone is here.
All right. Some other people trickle in as we go. We can handle that, but I think we've got a couple housekeeping things to handle before we get into our main agenda item. All right. So first of all, important notice regarding city council or planning of the, what are we? Design review board meetings. This meeting is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the state of California executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Live stream and Zoom is being utilized for this meeting. In case of technical issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after this meeting. We'll be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Design review board members and staff are participating from remote locations, practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by the use of Zoom as noted on the city's website and noted on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during the discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom to do so. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. So thank you for everybody for joining. This is the January 5th meeting of the Design Review Board. And can I have a roll call, please?
Yeah. Christine Lovell.
Give her a minute to
Right,
unmute.
I'm here. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm here.
Carrie Bush.
Here.
Marshall Belf.
Marshall, I think you're muted as well.
Yep.
Unmute.
There he
Can
is.
can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you, Marshall. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And Vice Chair Lars.
I am here. My internet's a little spotty, so I might have to turn my video off.
Okay, thank you. And Chair Ted Luthen.
Here.
All right, so everybody is here.
Thank you for that. Let's see. I think we have some ancient minutes back from August 18th to review and approve. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at those. And this was the meeting in which we were discussing the item that's on today's agenda. So any comments from board members on the minutes? Seeing none and hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes as written?
Sure, yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
All right. Thank you for that, Carrie. We have a motion on the floor. Can I have a second, please?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's call the question. All in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Sounds like all eyes on the minutes.
Correct.
All right, minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Let's move on to back to our agenda. Planning Department update on matters of general interest. Anything fun going on in the Planning Department, John?
Nothing too major. We're still working on the housing element update that is being done by a consultant. So I encourage anybody that has any concerns on local housing to help out with surveys that are being done by that group. And I believe in February, they're going to be doing a draft summary that's going to be presented to City Council.
Sounds good. All right, thank you very much. All right, next item. Do we have any comments from the public regarding items that are not on our agenda today? Does anybody have just something in general to say? I'm not seeing any raised hands. John, did we get any correspondence from anybody on items not on our agenda?
No, I did not receive anything for items that are not on the agenda today.
All right, thank you. Let's see, any conflicts of interest or anything from board members before we get started? All right, seeing none, let's roll into our regular agenda item 771 to 773 First Street, proposed single-family dwelling with a detached accessory unit. John, can we get a staff report, please?
Yes, so the item that is on the agenda for tonight is a continuance of the August 18th meeting where the project was heard for the first time. I just want to remind everybody that no decision on the project is going to be made tonight. It's going to be a consideration of providing guidance from the design review board on how to guide staff and the applicant team to a requirement for the mitigation measure 8 in regards to house size and height. The mitigation measure number 8 tasks the design review board to determine what is an allowable home size based on design review guidelines and the general plan. With that, within the staff report, there is a aerial view of 18 parcels that were taken into consideration for the general area and house size. The average square foot of those 18 parcels was 2,440 square feet, the largest measuring 3,732 square feet, and the smallest was 1,328 square feet. And the image that's proposed, or the image that is included within the staff report of the unconditioned space in orange, the lower, which is of the lower floor, is the reasoning behind the statement on page 7 of the staff report relating to the definition of size. And that is all that I have as far as the staff report. It's basically just a discussion on what the appropriate house size is to be based off of mitigation measure number 8.
Gotcha. So that's really the point of this meeting, is to give some guidance on what that measure, mitigation measure 8, means and how it should be interpreted, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Board members, any questions of staff regarding all of this? I am not seeing any questions of staff from board members. Let's see.
Ted,
Yes.
it's Christine here. I
yeah.
would like to reserve the option to ask staff questions as we go along as they crop up possibly.
I think that's a good idea. We'll proceed, and yeah, we might need a little more input as we get a little further into this thing. I know our applicant is here. Would they like to make a statement about this? I see Gregory nodding his head in the affirmative. All right, let's do that next.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate it. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
Yep.
Now that I just muted myself again there. Yeah, and previously, prior to the December 15th meeting, we had talked about with planning, and I believe Carrie maybe even discussed with you, Ted, that we were planning on doing a short presentation as well. I don't think it should take more than 5 or 10 minutes or something like that, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. John, do I have permission to share screen?
I will go ahead and do that for you right now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you should have it.
All right. So let's see, I'm doing PowerPoint. So I think you should see my kind of homepage of PowerPoint there. Hopefully it'll stay on there when I go to actual full view there. Are you able to see it the way it should look there?
Yeah, yep, that's good.
Great, fantastic. All right, so thanks, John, for the intro there. And yes, the mitigation M8 is what we're here to specifically focus on. With me here today is Kenyon Webster, planning consultant and former planning director for Sebastopol, and then Tina Wallace, attorney at law. They've both been helping consult with us since the last meeting to help us understand how best to approach this. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is and I think some of this is just for the public to hear, is that this is a process. And I think a lot of us got caught a little off guard at the last meeting, and it was a little chaotic, and I'm glad some time has gone by and we've been able to put some more thought into this. So I'm looking forward to a productive meeting today. You know, I just want to make a point that, you know, Rose and Steve are going to be our neighbors, and that, you know, that subdivision 20 years ago provides legal rights to build a home here, and going through design review is kind of the next step in that process. As I just mentioned a second ago, the last design review board meeting, I think, you know, mitigation 8 caught us all off guard a little bit, and design review board and ourselves, and kind of the chaos that came around all of us trying to understand if and how to use this, you know, really is what got us here. I think if we weren't in COVID times and doing more things in person, I think we would have been a lot farther along by now, but this is the norm that we're dealing with now. So I appreciate everybody's patience to get to this point. Since the last meeting, we've had a lot of correspondence with planning. We had a site meeting with Becky Duckles. We have done quite a bit of research ourselves. And in my opinion, M8 is clear, but it's flawed. You know, what was intended and or implied 20 years ago versus how the design review board decides today to interpret and or deem relevant today is why we're here. So I'm looking forward to a conversation around that. And I hope that I'd like to respectfully ask that we all keep an open mind and open ears as we respectfully have a conversation around this. And we and our clients will hope that we will get a reasonable interpretation of this, and we'll be able to proceed into a normal design review meeting following this. So as John was alluding to a little bit, but I want to add to is that mitigation 8 is not specifically about size. I hopefully the board got both of our letters, the one sent on the 6th and the one following the planning report as well. And that this meeting is not to talk about the previously submitted projects, design, tree issues, or grading issues, specifically about M8. We spent many hours doing research prior to last meeting, but many since then, and collected a lot of data on single-family homes in the area. And it was really interesting. And, you know, I think there was maybe, I can't remember, 200 to 300 homes that we looked at. And coincidentally, some of the extremes of these sizes ended up named streets close by to this subject property. Lot sizes from 0.1 acre on Hayden Avenue to 3.9 acres on First Street. Floor area ratio 3% on First Street to 80% on Hayden. Home sizes that range from 665 square feet to 6,220 square feet. Years built from 1895 to 2020. And we also observed some inaccuracies in the public database, the GIS map that the city of Sebastopol has that the city of Santa Rosa hosts, which I'll point out a couple through here. Like I said, we also took many photos and kind of analyzed a few intersections. And I think that this is just, mitigation 8, M8, is specific, and we need to interpret what the intention of that was and what the legal meanings are of that. But I think some context is really the point of the presentation here. So first, starting with a photo of what is called the Hayden Extension here. So this is on Jewel Ave, looking towards what was originally designed as an extension of Hayden Street, or Hayden Avenue, I should say. And in 2001, during the subdivision approval, there was a tree that wanted to be preserved, and so therefore this extension was abandoned. This is another perspective from the street, actually in the summer, I took earlier in the summer. And a subject property is behind there. Sorry, hopefully these aren't showing up too blurry for you. This is the adjacent the property lines to First Street, kind of on the northwest corner of the 3 properties of this subdivision. These pictures were taken in December. Lots 1 is pretty clearly visible from here, lot 2 a little bit, and lot 3, our client's property is very limited visibility from the street here. I just took a number of pictures in the areas. Many of you will recognize some of these homes. The left picture is actually shot from our client's property looking south. But the rest, I think the right 2 are on First Street. I think the left is on Leland. This home on First Street, I think, is one of this home has been discussed a couple times by planning as well as us as one of the larger homes in the area. And just wanted to point out that this is from First Street. This is the most you can see of the home there. That was built in '98 and is 3,732 square feet. This is just another large home. I believe this is the 6,220 square foot home. Many of these you might also recognize. A couple of these are on Leland. One of these, I think the bottom left one there, I believe, is on Mitchell Court. This is on Bayberry Court, just a few hundred feet, couple hundred feet from the subject property. We found conflicting information on the square footage of this home. I found both 3,336 square feet and elsewhere found 4,400 square feet. It has a pretty large, presentation mass to the street here. Here's a few other, I think the top left one is on First Street neighboring the property. The other three, I think, are also just south of the property in the Bayberry Court area, I believe. These are a few others kind of off of Jewel, between the property, kind of in those different eras of development between Hayden and all the way out to Lynch and within the city limits. Top left here is a large detached garage, Jewel, and these other unique on the bottom, these two pictures. The right one is a very large open space with an old barn and a lot of things going on there next to I think this development was in the 90s, I believe. Here's more in that general area, kind of between McFarland and Jewel. A few more of those showing an assortment of numbers of garages, 1-story, 2-story. This one is on kind of the south end of Jewel, pretty large. I believe this one's actually a duplex of sorts, but in the right on the south end of Jewel there. Bottom left and bottom right are both on Jewel. Top pictures here are in Swain Woods off of Palm. Here's a few more from Swain Woods. And here's just kind of wanted to show kind of the eclectic nature of architecture, size and setting that is on First Street alone. I believe all these homes are on First Street. This is the intersection of Hayden and Jewel. Quite an assortment of different, once again, 2-story, 1-story colors and styles and era. It was interesting as depending on how literal you and really want to get specific, Jewel near Hayden, so Jewel Avenue, but near Hayden, which M8 specifically calls out if we really wanted to boil down. This is what you see, which is, besides the other homes I just showed, is backyards and fences of other properties there. This is a map. I actually used city provided GIS map here. Sorry, I'm not quite as sophisticated as many to do this digitally, so I hand drew it and took a picture of it. But this shows in red, and I don't know if you can see. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the 3-lot subdivision. In orange, this is Swain Woods, and coincidentally, and I didn't realize this, that there's 2 parts of Swain Woods on the opposite, on the west side of First Street, which I thought was kind of interesting. My home, which we'll get to on in a little bit, in just a second here, is shown in this kind of green color here. But these radiuses you see here are the planning gave a number of 650 feet. So that's what this inner blue line is. A quarter of a mile, which is what we included in our letter, which is more of a typical use of a measurement to describe a general area at minimum, which is typically a 10-minute walking distance, showing that there, as well as up to a half-a-mile radius, just to give some context. I also highlighted here in green, this is Jewel Avenue from the very south end all the way to the north end. I also have First Street here in kind of a pink from north to south end, as well as Hayden Avenue going east to west. A few of the intersections that I in close by here, that in the general area that I wanted to look at, and I thought were kind of unique. One is the intersection of Palm and South High. I used to actually live just 3 doors up from this intersection, and it's quite an eclectic corner. You notice the home on the top left is a very similar style architecturally to the home on the bottom right in the pictures, but one of the homes is about 2.5 times is the size of the other one. And in the other corners, you have a 1950s home that's 1,800 square feet, and then you have a much newer modern home on the other corner of that that's about 2,400 square feet. I also, so as you'll see, I'm kind of looking around the edges of Swain Avenue to see what subdivision and different eras of development, what we already have in existence here. And so on the east side of the Swain Woods development, the intersections of Palm, Pinecrest, Vine, that, and the bottom left shows a picture of one of the edge homes of Swain Woods. But then following that are much older homes. A few of them are much larger, exceeding 3,000 square feet, if not closer to 4,000, along with some much smaller homes that are in the low 1,000s. This is on the very northern edge of Swain Avenue in Swain Woods. The larger home, the larger picture on the left here is the last home part of Swain Woods development, followed by the home in the bottom right was built in the 50s. And this other house on the top right here was also built in the 50s, much smaller than the Swain Woods home. This brings us to the intersection of Swain and Calder. I apologize if a couple of these pictures are blurrier than I realized. The bottom right picture is actually my home. I live at this intersection. I live at 487 Swain Avenue, 1,620 square feet, built in the 50s. But I just wanted to kind of show the progression. The bottom right corner there, you see a handful of homes built in the 50s. On the medium to small side, but getting into Swain Avenue, it jumps up by about 50% there. On the other side of the street, when you look in the bottom left corner, we have two homes built in the 70s, 1,800 square feet and about 2,500 square feet. And then 1989, 4,994 square feet in Swain Woods there. And I actually, just to go to the next slide here, I'm going to skip one and I'll come in a second. This is the view from my master bedroom window. And this is my view of a 4,994 square foot house. Before doing this study, I had no idea. And and I talked to some of the neighbors and they had no idea. I can tell you that I have not been harmed by that home since I have lived there, but it did surprise me. The design of this home, which I'll go back, sorry, joking aside. Well, I'll talk about my home for a second here. Many people told you is 1,620 feet. Many people think that I live in a 2-story home and it's a pretty large home. But if you look at the bottom middle picture here, that's actually what my lower level is. It's a 7-foot ceiling and it's storage. So these lower windows is not a lower level, but my home appears much larger than it is actually usable, excuse me. So going to this house, 500 Swain Avenue, these are some photos of the house. Top 3 are visible from Swain Avenue, and the bottom 3 are what's visible from Jewel. And I think that there's a lot about this setting of this house that's very similar. And it's a smaller lot than our subject property, but very similar to our proposed project. So just kind of summing things up, I just, to clarify, which I think has already really been done, is that we're really looking for the conversation and input, but we're really focused on M8. And we want to be able to use the interpretations and the definitions from this meeting so that we know how to prepare for the actual standard meeting. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you for that. Let's see, board members, any questions of our applicant about what we just saw? Let's see, why don't I go around here? Marshall, any questions?
No, no, not right now.
All right, thank you. Christine, any questions?
No, I do reserve the right though to ask questions later. Just the
Sure.
beginning.
Yeah, sounds good. Carrie Bush, any questions?
No, Ted, I don't have any questions at the moment.
All right, Lars, any questions?
No questions right now, thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's open this up to public comment. Anybody from the public like to speak, or have we received anything electronically? And John, I'll let you facilitate this.
Okay, so I have Ken Jacobs with his hand raised. If you want to go ahead and ask your question, Ken.
Sure. My name is Ken Jacobs, 7480 Hayden Avenue. I served for 8 years on the Planning Commission and have an understanding of the challenge you face today. I think everyone here would agree that condition of approval M8 leaves much to be desired in terms of its clarity. However, it's what we have, and you, the board, have the unenviable task of interpreting it. I suspect much of the discussion today will be legalistic, focusing on the meaning of terms such as shall and general area, neighborhood, and size. Despite all this, please do not be distracted by all the legalese here. You are not here as lawyers and judges. Rather, you are a citizens commission with an expectation that you will utilize your experience, professional skills, and common sense in applying M8 to the proposed project. I would suggest, rather than getting bogged down in debating the terms used in M8, you take a common sense approach instead. What exactly did the City Council intend when they adopted M8 as part of the subdivision back in 2001? Well, it seems pretty clear the overall intention was that the houses to be built on that 3-lot subdivision be of similar size to the neighboring houses. That's it. That's what it says. For example, the applicant has suggested that general area means the entire zip code, including unincorporated West County. Applying common sense here, does anyone actually believe that was what the council intended? Another example. The applicant suggests that parts of their proposed house that they have labeled as unconditioned space should not be counted in determining total square footage. Apparently, according to the applicant, not only should an internally connected 2-car garage and a separate RV garage not be counted, but neither should there be their proposed workshop, a sewing room, 5 storage rooms, closets, a west mud room, an east mud room, and a roughly 600 square foot multi-purpose room, with a combined square footage of well over 2,000 square feet, all under the same massive roof. Again, applying common sense here. Does anyone actually think this is what the council intended? For the comparable houses, staff has suggested a 600-foot radius, which I understand is based on the notice requirement for public hearings on land use issues in Sebastopol. This seems very reasonable in that it relies on an existing city ordinance that already defines what the city considers to be neighbors affected by development projects in town. This makes sense. Further, if you take a holistic approach to M8, it seems clear that the council was looking at something akin to a neighborhood average. They did not say that the homes to be constructed on the subdivision shall not exceed the largest house in the neighborhood. Rather, they directed that the homes to be constructed on the subdivision shall not exceed those of similar homes in the general area. This is plural, homes. They all must be considered, or in other words, an average. I'm fully in favor of the applicant being permitted to build their home. We have always known that a house would eventually be built on that lot and the others in the subdivision. We accept that. But it is truly in our backyard, and we have always assumed that whatever is built there would be a similar size to us and to our neighbors. This is what we were told back in 2001. This is what the Schock family agreed to when they subdivided the lot, and this is what the city council mandated for this property. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Yes, Daniel and Dale. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, I did not unmute. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you.
There you are.
According to the presentation we just saw, it's not unusual to get larger and larger homes. So I would submit that by 2025, if I have the money, I can build a 10,000 square foot home on any place I want. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm looking around. I don't see. Yes.
iPad 5. Oh, you're muted. Can you please unmute yourself? We can see you talking, but can't hear you. There you are.
Better?
Yep.
Hi,
Now we have you.
I'm Stephen Wilson. My wife and I live at 885 First Street. We live in the basin of Calder Creek, which I like to call Calder Creek Natural Preserve and Watershed Area, which has never been mentioned. In comparison to homes that we've been shown pictures of, I feel like I'm being shown a grid in the desert someplace. You know, this house is this big, this house is this big. I think the point that everyone seems to miss, and I think in the subdivision done in 2001, what they failed to recognize, and possibly earlier members of the commission, is that we are in a watershed area. And this watershed area consumes a lot of water. And downstream owners are affected by loss of watershed, which is diverted into Culvert Creek, which on my property has clearly been made into a drainage ditch rather than a friendly running creek, Calder Creek. I have deep holes in my property that are 2 or 3 feet deep from the water that either has been diverted from city streets or wherever. And I lived at 666 Ellis Court off of Hillsburg and built the house there in 1983. I also was in a Winter Creek watershed area. And the city told me that once a culvert was put underneath my driveway, everything would be fine. But from their lack of consulting a hydrologist and really finding out what would happen with the building behind us in the Garmin project, which was 12 or 13 homes and city streets and everything, I had deep gorges on my property down 5 and 6 feet and 7 feet wide. I went to the city and it said, you said everything would be all right and put a culvert underneath my driveway, it would be fine. Well, guess what? All my topsoil went downstream. I had to haul in 2 double loads of rock from Forestville someplace, and my son and I, in a wheelbarrow, just filled in those 2 4 loads. So what I'm saying is, if we are going to steal more watershed from the Calder Creek Reserve here, and I know the people on Jewel are not really belonging to this area. I'm on the flat area practically. I'm almost on the creek. And as far as Swain Wood is concerned, they're not part of this watershed area. They can build what they want to build. I'm down below on the bottom where the water flows. And I'm saying this is a very sensitive area. We have magnificent oak trees that are taking up this watershed. They're producing tremendous amounts of oxygen. And they're diluting all this carbon dioxide in the air. So it's a nature area. It's not just a grid area like a desert grid. It's a very, very special and sensitive area. And I don't think the city has for the last 20 or 30 years acknowledged that. Even Trees Unlimited is speaking to the city right now. And they are going to extend from Ives Park to the Laguna and open Culvert Creek so the public can enjoy it and have walking paths on it and everything. I have no idea what the city has done with this Culvert Creek area. Only thing I know is I have tremendous holes because of loss of watershed. I have no idea when this big monstrosity house is going to be built and stealing of the watershed from this preserve area. What's going to happen to downstream owners, I don't know, but I really want to object to the size of this house being built in a very sensitive natural area. an ecological area in our city that I believe the city has failed to recognize for many years. And that's my input is concerning with the watershed that the city has ignored for many years. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. William Payne?
Yes, I'm not William,
Oh, sorry.
but I just wanted to say that this is a huge house. Even if it'll be like having a hotel in our neighborhood with only 2 guests. It seems pretty ridiculous. They could, even at 4,000 square feet, they would have a very large home. It's just 6,000 square feet and up is just so out of character for this neighborhood. It just really doesn't belong here. And I don't know why 2 people need that many square feet, but if they do, maybe they should build it somewhere else. I don't know. I don't really want to turn into a weird hotel neighborhood. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Daniel and Dale?
Hi, this is Dale. I still object to comparing our neighborhood to Swain Woods. That seems like a very different neighborhood than Jewel Avenue and First Street. The nature of the homes are different. The sizes of the homes are different. I know it's not real far away, but it's just a different neighborhood, a different feel. I wish Steve and Rose could build their house in Swainwood. It would maybe fit in better than what they're planning. I'm happy to have them as neighbors, but I really hope they can figure out how to build a house that's more in keeping with the sizes of the homes in our neighborhood right now. We live right on Jewel Avenue, 814, right behind maybe where the ADU will go.
All right, thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. My name is Paul Olson. I live at 810 Jewel Avenue, adjacent to the east side of the property proposed. I've already spoken at the last meeting regarding my concerns about the size of the property. And I think that's been brought up several times, and the health and the ongoing safety of the heritage oak trees along the east side of the property as well. I feel that this property, built as close as it is to the root systems, is going to damage them irreparably and are going to cause them to be taken out at some point. My question is, I understand that the city requires ADU units to be part of new construction, and I just would like to put the question out. Is there any plans for the use? Is it for family, for guests? Is it going to be a rental or a VRBO? These are things that might concern the neighborhood. And the last thing I just want to say is that on page 4 of the staff report, there was a paragraph regarding the visual impact of the property to the neighboring neighbors. And yes, we're definitely going to be looking down on it. It's going to be below our living area, but we'll be looking at the roof. I understand that. The size of it to be determined. But tree work was completed during the month of December along the Calder Creek side of the property, the west side, and several trees were taken down, stumps ground up. And now I have a complete view of 3 more neighbors' houses on First Street, both on the east and the west side of the street that we've never seen before in 37 years, that were shielded by trees and growth. I now look directly into the back of the house directly across from our property. I'm not sure when that tree work was authorized, or I realized they took out some vegetation and some dead down towards the road end, but that's just a question I have now, is that tree work has been done and that tree is not going to come back. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
They don't answer any questions, huh?
Pardon me?
They don't answer any questions.
No.
And do we have any more members of the public that wish to speak? Daniel and Dale?
I just have a question. Does the ADU absolutely have to be built? I know the idea is to get more infill in the city, but I wondered if there was any way to build it somewhere else or not build it at all. I was just curious about that. It seems like the rest of the project is so overwhelming that it would be wonderful to at least not have that part.
Yeah, I can answer that real quick. So within the resolution that was signed in 2001, there's a planning condition for lot number 3, which is the lot that we're here for tonight, that it is required to have an ADU on that parcel.
No way around that.
No, it's part of the original resolution that was signed. Unfortunately, that's what is in place.
Could I ask a question?
Is it Marshall?
Yeah.
Let's close up. If there's any more members of the public that would like to speak, and then we'll go back around, I think, to the board. Does that sound fair?
I have just one thing I'd like to ask.
Okay.
And that's what will the process be going forward? And will the votes or planning commission have any accountability in terms of deciding on both the care of the trees on the property and the house size? So will this come before the commission and the public again many times? And how will the final results be? How will that happen?
Okay, so the meeting tonight is going to be to determine what the appropriate path forward for the applicant and staff is as it relates to the house size and height in mitigation measure 8. So once that's determined, there will be another public meeting that is in specific regards to the design of what's being proposed for that parcel. So this item will come back again at a later point in time.
Are you saying that before this meeting ends tonight, we'll know what size that house is going to be?
It's up to the board to determine what that that size or what they feel is appropriate is going to be.
And that's going to happen today? That's going to happen right now?
Correct.
Okay.
Daniel and Dale?
Yeah, one more question. I think that it was just mentioned that the ADU, that the reasoning is that this law was passed in 2001. Is that correct? To have the ADU on that property?
Correct.
Okay, so I also wanted to comment, if that statute for the ADU, which was in 2001, applies without any recourse to this property, then shouldn't M8, which was also, I believe, 2001, apply without any recourse to this property? And the size of the place, saying that it shall be consistent with the neighboring properties, is consistent in 2001. I think, from what has been said, then it should hold equal binding force with the ADU statute of 2001.
That I'm not sure. Larry, are you able to offer any advice on that?
If I understand the question, perhaps this would be the answer. The condition M8 is a mandatory condition, meaning it shall apply to this project.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comments or questions? And seeing none, why don't we bring it back to the board for some discussion? So I think we're.
Okay, Ted, I have a question of staff prior to the discussion.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so John, can you please explain the significance of the 650-foot radius?
Yeah, so the radius that was given there is the same radius that we use for any notice that goes out to the public in regards to a project that's being affected by those neighbors within that radius. So for the general area in the mitigation measure 8, that was our staff's determination as far as what that radius should be.
Thank you, John.
And just as a follow-up to that, where does that 650 feet come from? Is that a state thing? Is that just a city thing?
It's within the city noticing ordinance.
Okay.
John, could I ask a question? This is Marshall.
Go ahead, Marshall.
Okay. The ADU, is there any language anywhere about it having to be a separate structure? So many of them are built within existing structures, either below or above or whatever. They work it out. And I'm thinking of alternatives to reduce the size down. And so that to me is a very important question. Can it not be part of the main house and eliminated entirely on the site?
The resolution for that measure, or the planning condition, does not specify whether it is to be detached or attached, from what I can read on the.
Okay, well, thank you. I do a lot of these ADUs, and we squeak them in anywhere we can, on downslopes or in the attics or whatever. And so it's good food for thought, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Ted, I have one question for the applicant.
All right, fire away.
I think it'd be helpful, since we're talking about size, and there's been some confusion according to the applicant with the staff report, what is the size of the proposed project? Overall size, conditioned versus unconditioned space?
So currently there is no proposed project. There was the project we submitted for the previous meeting until M8 came up. And we've been working with planning and going through everything to figure out what these M8 implies to this site. And therefore, there is currently no proposed project. The previously proposed project was, I believe, 4,500 and change for the conditioned square footage.
Okay. So we're meeting to talk about M8 for any project on these 3 lots.
Correct. Sorry, that question might not have been for me. Sorry, Lars.
Okay, no, I'm throwing it out there in general. So we're now sort of erasing from our memory any project proposed for any of these 3 lots.
Correct.
And we're talking about M8, I suppose, not just generally, but I mean, generally plus we understand lot 3 is going to have a project proposed and coming before us in the near future.
Correct.
Does that make sense to everyone?
I think that is exactly what we're doing is we are here to determine the interpretation of M8 and basically the square footage associated with that condition.
This is Marshall again. I personally have a problem with trying to establish something for all 3 lots since they're different sizes, unless we talk about percentages or FARs or some such thing, because the size for this project theoretically could be larger.
Yeah, I think the other part of this particular subdivision is it's encumbered by creek setbacks and existing trees and those sorts of things too that are going to that are I think limiting factors on the parcel that we've talked about before, and I think they're going to be even more limiting factors on the other parcels. Height limit, setbacks, those sorts of things, driveways are all going to slice into that. So
I have a further comment to my comment, which is it really our purview to sort of talk about the appropriate size of a home on one of these lots? Or is it from the wording in M8, we are to respond to a proposed project on one of these lots, and is it appropriate or does it meet our design review board standards?
that's a good question. Are we picking a number and that's the number and it just applies, or are we going to basically kick the can down the road and say, bring a project and we'll respond? I guess we could do either one of those things.
Well, I'm kind of asking, I don't know, maybe it's a Larry question, but is it, what is in the language? Is the language designed for us to respond to just any project that comes along? We should think it should be within a certain square footage, or is it really language that should be tied to a specific project proposal?
Ultimately, it will be tied to a specific project proposal. That is the function of the design review board. As I understand, I don't regularly attend these meetings. As I understand the nature of this particular meeting, this is intended to be helpful to the applicant, to have a discussion of condition M8 to assist the applicant in not wasting the applicant's resources and attempting to craft a project that will, they hope, come within the design review board's interpretation of M8, ultimately to reserve resources so that what they do will be useful. But ultimately it is, as you said, it is to apply condition M8 and any other applicable conditions and state and city statutes, etc., to a specific project, which will come to you in the future.
Right. That's good. Yeah, thank you, Larry. That's very helpful.
Okay, I have another question for staff. John.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so John, this term keeps being thrown about conditioned space. And I'd like to kind of have a little discussion about what that means. I mean, of course, I know what that means, but if we're talking about the size of the homes, and then we're going to say, well, we're going to interpret that to only mean the conditioned space of the home, then that would imply that we could have a home with, that's say 2,000 square feet with a 10,000 square foot garage and another 5,000 square feet of storage. And so what is meant by the square footage here to be interpreted by M8? What square footage are we talking about?
Well, it doesn't talk about square footage. It talks about size and height.
Yeah. Yeah, it only
Well,
mentions
size, square footage, square footage.
Well, that's, I think, if you're talking about size, square footage could include condition and unconditioned. Right? Its size means to me like the whole building, the whole thing.
Well, that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking, because this conditioned space term keeps getting thrown around. And what I'm trying to say, and I'm asking John for the interpretation, although I appreciate what you're saying, Lars, is if we're just talking about conditioned space, then we could have a 2,000 square foot home with a 10,000 square foot garage and another 5,000 square foot all within a bulk, and we're going to be getting a rather large size of bulk that would be substantially bigger than the average of their houses in the neighborhood. If I'm making sense here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would consider it as, an overall footprint of the building, whether the conditioned spaces within that unconditioned area, the overall exterior walls, whether they be conditioned or not, are still a footprint on the parcel, and that those should be considered as.
Christine, I concur with John in that.
Well, here's a staff question in their analysis related to this is there was a 3,732 number thrown about as the maximum home built in the general area in the last 30 years. Is that based on what you just said, John, we can assume those numbers are footprint, conditioned or unconditioned?
Correct. From the data that we have available through GIS, that, from my understanding, is overall footprint.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Greg, you had your hand up. Did you want to go ahead?
Oh, you're muted, Greg.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that I appreciate the opportunity to just ask or respond. I know this is the board's time to speak amongst themselves, but I've obviously spent the last few months deep into this. And so what I just wanted to put in a question to the board, and there's actually a couple comments that we had in our letter. Our submittal, previous submittal, we took every overhang, every covered porch, everything, and included it in our numbers to account for everything, eaves, porches, everything. And there is zero data for what other existing homes have that other than their conditioned square footage. So I guess a question that I was hoping that could be asked and discussed is, if we are deeming that it is overall square footage or overall every bit of space, whether it's conditioned or not, how do you make that comparison? I also want to put in the point that the 650-foot radius, I know it's used for notification, but I also would like to ask the board not just take that as a standard, because I don't think there's any precedence to using that as a definitive line of what to compare, not to compare for a project. So I think that's part of I just want to make sure that's part of the conversation. The other thing is that I found multiple inaccuracies in square footage and dates of original build in the GIS database as well. I just wanted to add those to the formula here. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Actually have a comment on the 650 square feet. I do think that that's actually very relevant, because what we're going to do, we've got this approved planning document here in the M8, which we're trying to interpret. And if we're going to change that or allow for something different than that, then it would require noticing. I would think, wouldn't that be normal? So it just seems a reasonable number, because to make that change, you would have to notice the people within 650 feet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Don?
Yes.
I mean, it seems the 650 feet seems very reasonable and logical to me. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and maybe we can break this down a little bit. Starting with that question is, first of all, does the board think that, when looking at how is M8 determined to similar homes, the most recent construction in the general area, how do we all feel about the 650-foot radius? Are we all in agreement that that is reasonable, or do we think some of us think that is unreasonable? And I'll throw my hat in the reasonable ring, because I think it sounds very reasonable to me.
I've made my point. I feel that it's reasonable.
Yeah. Lars, what are your feelings?
I agree.
Marshall agrees.
Mm-hmm.
Lars, how are you feeling about the 650-foot radius?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
All right. Gregory, did you have something to chime in on?
Yeah, I'd like to, I guess I'm unmuted. To our understanding, that actually amends M8, which is not what the intent, because I'd like this, and I'd like to ask Larry this question, actually, because general area equals 650-foot radius. I'm not sure where it says that in. And if there's any precedence or standard that has already taken place in the city of Sebastopol elsewhere that gives relevance to that.
I obviously haven't studied what's happened elsewhere, but I will say that generally the noticing requirement is intended to give notice to the neighborhood which is affected. So affected neighborhood, I think, works both ways. So it kind of makes reasonable sense to me that if you're looking at a general area and trying to interpret what was meant in 2001 by the words general area, you're looking at the affected neighborhood both ways. So that, to me, that seems to signal what was in the intent at the time that this was written, that's a very relevant and reasonable way to interpret M8 is within that particular radius. So I do agree with staff's analysis of that.
Yeah, and I also think that falls right into the language of M8, including both First Street area and the Swain Woods neighborhood, and then Jewel near Hayden. So it really gave a subsegment of the Swain Woods neighborhood as the general area, and all that falls within that 650-foot radius. So I think that all sort of points to that general area as being the general area in M8, at least in my opinion.
And then Kerry, did you ask Kerry about his opinion?
Kerry, what's your opinion?
What's my opinion? Do I have an opinion? Oh, no. No, I find it reasonable. I mean, I think it was well noted right there. It was like it's been established as an area for the general neighborhood. So therefore, I think it seems suitable.
Yeah. And I think it was Ken Jacobs that mentioned earlier that We just have to think about what was the original intent when M8 was written. And I think that was the intent, was that, okay, we've got a subdivision here. We want these houses to fit in with the neighborhood houses. And I think that all kind of makes sense to me. Then I think the next issue is, what does size mean? And if I'm
Ted,
understanding, yeah, go ahead.
Can I, Tina is a part of our group here. Is it possible for her to add to this, please?
Yeah, Tina, if you have something to share.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to go back to the plain language of M8, because the plain language references a general area, and then it identifies two sub areas. It speaks of the general area, including both the First Street area and the Swain Woods neighborhood, Jewel near Hayden. So arbitrarily adding the 650 foot radius or circumference, it was not contemplated by M8 because it excludes the larger general area and only captures two of the exemplar sub areas. Also, there are jurisdictions that have extended their notice requirements out to 3,000 feet in the past couple of years. So Sebastopol may be using 650 feet, but other jurisdictions are going much, much larger. So I would ask you to look at the plain language of M8, take that language on its face, which is any principle of statutory interpretation, and consider that the general area was intended to be much larger than the two exemplar sub areas.
Right, thank you for that.
Okay, I'd like to jump in here real quick. Because I think it's looking like we're going to be having a back and forth conversation with the application, which I don't think is appropriate to this phase of our discussion. But what I would like to do is I would like to make a motion to adopt the 650 feet as part of our discussion. Anybody want to second that?
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to adopt 650 feet as the reasonable boundary of M8. Any additional discussion on this before we?
I'm having a hard time accepting that as a fulfilling notion and motion here to make this a concrete item to this discussion without the full scope of what we're trying to discuss here. So, I mean, is this the notion for M8 right here, is to adopt 650 feet? So I am clear that this is there's clearly an area that we're talking about. There's a size that we're talking about. So maybe we make our motions at the end of this discussion versus at the current moment.
Yeah, well, and I guess a question for staff or Mary, maybe for Larry, is our end product of today motion or set of motions that are approved, or is our end product today basically encapsulated in verbal direction to future applicants on these properties?
Bear in mind, I haven't been regularly attending DRB meetings. However, as I mentioned earlier, I think the intent today is that you're giving the applicant such guidance as the board can give to assist the applicant in structuring a project that will ultimately meet this board's interpretation of what M8 requires. You're trying to assist the applicant in that regard. You are not making a decision, a final decision in any way on a project. So to give assistance, I think what you're trying to do today should be to develop a board consensus over how M8 is interpreted and give the substance of that consensus to the applicant in sufficient detail that the applicant will be assisted, assuming they wish to do so, in structuring a project that will meet that interpretation that this board is making. So you could do that by a motion, sure. You could do it by just developing a consensus and a show of hands. This is not a decision, a final decision on a project. So I don't think it matters as much what structure you use to try and develop a consensus, whether that's by motions or a series of motions, or just developing a consensus, or you could almost even do it by an elaborate discussion, and you can sense the consensus from the comments of individual board members. Anything will work, I think, at this stage where you're trying to give assistance to the applicant. But if I was suggesting, I would say, try and develop a consensus around an interpretation of M8. It seems rather clear to me that the board believes that this 650-foot radius really is what was meant by the general area reference within that condition. If you develop a consensus around that, you could do it by motion, or you could do it simply by a show of hands. And any other element of M8 that you want to discuss in a similar manner. I hope this is helpful. I'm just trying to stress you're not making a decision today, a final decision on a project. You are trying to give guidance for future review.
Perfect. Thank you,
Okay, I
Larry.
have one quick question for Larry. One quick question for Larry. So Larry, I believe that since this M8 applies to all three lots, that our guidance that we're giving today on M8 would apply generally to all three lots. So for example, the 650-foot radius.
I would agree with that.
Thank you. And I also want to add that what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to establish a limit for the area that we're discussing, the general area. I'm trying to establish a limit on that. We can establish that limit and move forward with the rest of our discussion here. Not limiting the rest of our discussion, but if we don't come up with an area limit that we're discussing the average size house of, then we're not going to get anywhere. We'll be here all day. And that is why I'm proposing a motion to limit it to the 650 square foot radius, which seems reasonable and makes sense from a planning point of view with the current planning standards of the city of Sebastopol.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I'm okay with proceeding either with motions or just with general agreement that 650 square foot or 650 foot radius is fair and reasonable. I don't know that do we need to put a hard cap on it at 650, or can we just kind of all agree 650 foot radius is fair and reasonable?
Mm-hmm. I think we have established that, Ted.
Do we need to go any harder and faster than that?
It was my understanding that there's a general consensus that it's been acceptable. To actually make a motion and vote on it, it didn't seem appropriate at the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm feeling the need to get that hard and fast with this. And I think the same is going to be true of my feelings about size and height. Because I think those are really the three issues: are what is the area for comparison? What is a reasonable size, or how is a reasonable size determined? And what about a reasonable height? It seems like those are kind of the three issues to me. Christine, are you satisfied if we just go on record as saying we all agree that 650 foot radius is fair and reasonable? Or do you want something harder and faster than that?
I would like to see it be as a motion, because otherwise we're just leaving it vague. It can be appealed. Anybody can continue to argue about it. And comments are just comments. They don't have any, there's no basis behind them. There's no firm decision. So I think if we're going to get to the bottom of this and resolve this problem, I think we need to start making some decisions. And the one decision that I'm making a motion of is that the limit for the area is 650-foot radius. Otherwise, what's to keep somebody from coming back later and going, I don't like that. I'm going to come back and argue with us again all day long about 3,000-foot radius or 5-mile radius.
Yeah.
That's my thinking behind this.
Okay.
That's why I'm making this motion.
Yeah, and we do have a motion on the table, and we have a second on that motion. So is there further, if there's further discussion, let's keep talking about it. And if not, let's call a question. Lars, what are your feelings on motion versus sort of consensus agreement?
I think, as Larry made a good point, that where this is sort of an advisory moment, so whether we give it a motion or it's just consensus, I think it'll have the same weight.
Okay. Marshall, any further thoughts?
No, I think we could just let it be not something we vote on, but I think it's clear to the applicant how we feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we do have a motion that is on the table and it has been seconded. Christine, you want to proceed with the motion? And if so, I will call the question.
Yes, let's proceed.
All right, let's continue on. Let's call the question on the motion. All in favor of the motion, which is establishing a 650-foot radius as the fair and reasonable limit for comparison. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. So just to be clear, I think I heard Lars, Christine, Marshall, and myself. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. All opposed?
Nay.
All right. We have one nay and carry. All right. Motion carries. 650 feet is the directed fair and reasonable radius. All right. Let's move on to, let's move on to height. Maybe we can do something that's a little easier than size. I don't know, maybe we should bite the bullet and just take on size and finish with something easy. I don't know, but let's go ahead and talk about height. So it also says shall not exceed size and height of the homes to be constructed within the subdivision. Any thoughts on interpretation of height? I guess my knee-jerk reaction is to accept the city's height limits as the maximum height and call it a day. Is there any reason to further limit height on this subdivision?
Ted, I agree with you, Ted. Sorry, Lars.
That's okay. I think that is that's part of the zoning code. So that will apply regardless, but we're size and height in this, as far as I can see in this language, is related to similar homes in the neighborhood. So it's an interpretation by the applicant to, say, oh, if I go to the max height allowed by zoning, that works in the neighborhood, great. Well, actually, no, it needs to be 10 feet lower because it otherwise will stick out and be too big, right? So I think to say height is only about what's in the zoning code it's not enough. We're trying to sort of determine, it's almost like its character of a place in a way and how it fits into a parcel.
Yeah, and I guess in this neighborhood, I see very tall houses and I see single-story homes. I kind of see a broad range of things. And I guess I'd feel more strongly about wanting to limit it if I saw, uniformly single-story homes or something like that in this neighborhood. But I think we have, we have two-story homes on downslopes and things like that create fairly tall buildings that probably are pushing the city's height limit. Any other thoughts on height relative to the similar homes in the general area?
Do we have any data on the home, on the heights of the homes? We have square footages, but I didn't see any
Yeah.
information on height.
I don't see any either.
No, I don't have anything on the GIS data that we use for the size does not include building height within that data.
Yeah, just looking at that neighborhood. I guess I'm having trouble coming up with a compelling reason to limit height to anything less than what is allowed. But if somebody's seeing something that I'm not.
No, I'll just echo what I said. I don't think we have to establish a lower height limit than what's allowed by zoning on a sloping site. Determining the height of the building is already a bit of a tricky exercise, and to make it a good building that minimizes grading and deals with drainage, etc. There is an appropriate height of a building in my mind. It's or there's an appropriate range. So to me, the zoning, we could I don't think we have to do more than what the zoning allows, but I think there's a discussion about the size discussion. We could say the size discussion includes the height in a sense. It's the bulk, it's the size, it's the footprint, it's the appropriate scale of the building on the parcel.
All right, so can we all generally agree that in terms of just pure height of a building, that the zoning standards are adequate and we don't feel compelled to impose anything more restrictive than that? Carrie's nodding. Marshall sounds like agreement. Christine, are you in agreement with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So there's that. And then there's this idea of size. And whether size includes conditioned airspace, unconditioned airspace. I think what we don't want is kind of what we had with the previous application, where there is sort of manipulation of those numbers to get a larger footprint by calling things unconditioned airspace. So I guess my feeling on this is, I'm in agreement with a lot of the staff's recommendations that unconditioned airspace needs to be included when we're considering the size of a proposed home. I also feel like, either a range of numbers or something, relating to, it does say homes, not home, in terms of the M8 language. So I think taking some sort of an average or something like that makes sense to me. The size and height of the homes to be constructed within should not exceed similar homes of the most recent construction in the general area. So to me, that speaks to an average. It speaks to, taking not necessarily just the biggest house and there it is, unless they were all kind of similarly large size or whatever. But here we've got a whole smattering of things, from pretty modest size homes to good size homes.
Where are you, Ed, where are you reading that? What is the, has every house in a 600-foot radius been cataloged by the city, and that's what we're going on? Or we should be clear on that. What are we comparing it to?
Right. And so I'm looking at the staff report, page 3, top first paragraph. Homes constructed from 1990 to present best captures the recent construction. Largest home is 3,700 square feet. Smallest is 13, average of 2,440 square feet.
At page 6 of the analysis from our prior report, which also compared the square footage of the common size home or similar homes, with a calculation that staff had made recommendations for the board not to go beyond 150% of 3,000 square feet. That's the upper end of the range of sizes in the area. There you go. So there was somewhere between that 125 to 150% of the average or upper end of the surrounding homes. So that was applied to the prior application. That's a guideline that I've been looking at for some time, digging back to these old documents. Again, staff analysis here.
If the average is 2440 and the largest is 3732, what you're saying, Carrie, and I remember that's kind of like the staff's actually being generous in a sense on the upper end of this range.
Correct.
Yeah, because you take 150% of the 2,400, you end up at 3,600 square feet.
Also,
I'd like to comment on this briefly. The M8 just talks about, kind of implies the average of the similar homes at this 150% and 125%. Where did that come from in relationship to M8? That doesn't seem to have any basis anywhere.
Well, M8 is not very clear. And so it seems to me the staff is doing a pretty good job of analysis and trying to give some guidance to the board. Like, here's what seems like a good size.
Exactly.
But where did those numbers come from? This is a question for John, I guess. Where did those numbers, those averages come from? And they seem to have disappeared from the current staff report, or have they?
The average is still there, 2440 square feet, but the guidance.
But where did this 125 and 150%, where did those numbers come from? I mean, besides the fact that the staff put them in there, but what is the reasoning behind that number? This is a question for John.
That was determined, no problem, Christine. So this project was originally started by Jeff Sutherland, who was a consultant working with Carrie. That is what their determination was as far as a percentage that felt appropriate and met the language in M8. The additional analysis is kind of going off of that report that was already done prior to this meeting.
So they just decided themselves that this would be an appropriate number.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct. From my understanding, that's what they based that percentage, 125 or 150 number off of.
So I'm struggling a little bit with this felt appropriate language. I mean, what is that based on? Just their feelings?
That was, I don't know, because I wasn't a part of that conversation before. That was before I was brought on to the city. So I don't know the full detail as to how those numbers were determined.
Okay, because what I'm looking for is some kind of precedent or something like based on what we did over here or based on the knowledge, but it looks like we can't get that question answered at this moment because the individuals involved are not available.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, John. Larry's got his hand up. Can Larry comment on this?
If I could, I just want to point out that with respect to size and height, it uses the word shall not exceed. So to me, shall not exceed points the board towards the largest square footage figure within that footage range that you've already talked about. and then sets it at the highest limit. Shall not exceed means it can go to the highest limit, but should not go above it. So if you're looking at a square footage that's the largest, quote unquote, I think that sets the ceiling. I think that should be the interpretation of M8, in my opinion.
Okay, I have just kind of a nuanced question about that, Larry, which may or may not be relevant, but it's using not the largest home, but homes. Is that relevant? Because the largest homes would encapsulate smaller
Now
homes.
that makes it a
than
bit
the largest
difficult, I
home.
have to admit. I suppose if you wanted to really stretch an analysis, you could start counting homes within the footage area and kind of average what the largest one was. But I still think it's reasonable interpretation to go to the largest square footage because of the specific use of shall not exceed.
I would agree with that, Larry. And we also have an average, right? So I go back to, we're going to have a nice discussion here, but it's up to the applicant to take these numbers and come up with the appropriate design for the site. And it could be, we could almost say it's from the average to the highest, and that's their range. That would be one way to interpret it.
Yeah, and I personally, I don't think I would have a problem with that. I don't know that we need to set a lower limit on it. So if they want a smaller home, they certainly can do that. I think it's really like Larry was saying, we need to establish that upper limit. And I guess my feeling is, I don't think the upper limit should be the average, because there are a lot of very modest sized homes in there, and they were probably built fairly early. And I'm guessing this is probably what Sutherland was getting at with his 150%, was making that number come out somewhere toward the higher end of the houses in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess just on purely on paper, am I concerned about one of these houses being one of the larger houses in the neighborhood? I mean, it doesn't seem like that was the intent of M8, was to say that it should be smaller than the largest home. It seems like the intent of M8 was that it should fit into the neighborhood. And if a 3,700 square foot house fits into the neighborhood because there's one already there, it seems like a 3,600 square foot house can fit into the neighborhood again. So it seems like that fits the spirit of what M8 was after.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Ted, I see that Greg has his hand up. Do you wanna...
Yeah, go ahead. Did you have something relevant to exactly what we're talking about? Oh, you're muted.
I took my hand down instead of unmuted. Sorry, it was maybe more relevant to a little bit earlier regarding the data of planning's report in comparing square footage, and also John's previous comment about size that he gleaned off of the GIS. That is all conditioned square footage. So there's no available, this had more to do with the condition unconditioned question, is that there is no available data for house heights, house unconditioned square footage, and what is counted for that. Is it 7 feet and below and no concrete floor? Is it under an eave or a covered porch? Is it a detached garage? Is it a 6-car garage? There's no data for that. And there's also no definition for it as either. So that was what I wanted to say. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so back to size. So we've got average of 2440. We've got the largest house is 3732. What are we thinking? Go ahead, Lars.
Well, I think Gregory's point is a good one, that how, if we give this guideline of, not to exceed 3732, what does that actually mean? If we don't know, does it include a garage or not? Does it include, a workshop underneath or not? That's some, I don't know that we can, get to that data point. So can we give sort of a guideline? This is what's on record that the staff has given us. We also know there's setbacks. We know there's trees. There's, common sense design. There's sort of other factors we can put forward. But if an applicant comes back with a 3,700 square foot house attached to a 2-car garage, is that good, bad, too big? Can we make that recommendation? Can we talk about that now or not?
Yeah. John, just to clarify, so the largest home, the 3732, that does not include things like garages?
From the data that I was able to pull, and that's within that picture of the staff report on page 3, those parcels that are outlined in blue are the 18 that were taken. That was the recent construction of 1990 to present. The largest home within those subject parcels was 3,732 square feet, but the data that we're able to see does not say if that includes a garage, workspaces, or anything like that. It just says what the county has recorded as square footage.
Gotcha.
Residents.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back to this language one more time, and then I want to talk about what's included in the house or the home. Again, it says the size of the homes to be constructed within this subdivision shall not exceed those of similar homes of more recent construction in the general area. So we have this outlier at 3732, but that's not generally applicable to the rest of the homes in that area. That's an outlier. So I think that using that number is not within the intent of this language at all. I think we would have to include more, maybe higher than the average, but more homes in the plural to be used in this number, because it's clearly an outlier. Second, when we're talking about the home, I think that the home itself is the bulk structure. I mean, you can see the slippery slope you're going to go down if you're just going to say, I'm going to condition this part of the bulk structure, and I'm not going to condition the rest of this part of the bulk structure. And therefore, my bulk structure is now twice as big as the determined number, because I'm not calling it conditioned space. So I think that the home itself must include the entire bulk of that building.
I agree. I think it's best if we include the entire bulk of the building in whatever guidance we give. Or I guess conversely, we could include some maximum allowance for square footage that is outside of the maximum. We could say that too. We could say, okay, a 3-car garage is 600 square feet. So in addition to the maximum, you can have up to 600 square feet of, unconditioned airspace, or whatever you want to call it.
What do other municipalities do? Right? Are we reinventing the wheel here, or what do other municipalities do? I mean, what's common sense? I mean, seriously, if you apply for a home, you build a home, do you build unconditioned space? Do you build conditioned space, guys? What are we talking about here? I understand the undertones to much of what this discussion's about, but the bottom line is why are we writing this why are we voting on this measure and inventing a new wheel here? It doesn't seem appropriate. It goes beyond, I feel, the purview of these guidelines. And I know we're trying to give direction and we're trying to provide consensus, but let's be realistic. If we build a home for a client, we build in conditioned space or unconditioned space. What do we put down in our application to the county, to the city, right? We ultimately will be here as a design review board to judge the common sense of a project, right? So it doesn't really, it can be within a max cap of 3,700 square feet. You can't build a home bigger than that. They do, and they have a 20,000 square foot garage attached to that. And we know it's not common sense. So therefore, does it go before the board? Sure. But does it get approved by the board? We don't know. So we just need to be realistic about what we're talking about in this language. You know, what do other municipalities require? And I'm not an architect, so I don't know. When I'm applying for a building permit, I'm usually putting down conditioned space versus unconditioned space and such. I don't know. Tell me, Lars. Maybe I'm off basis here.
Well, you put down everything. You can put down the garage, you can put down a deck or a covered deck, because whatever is built has a valuation, which then a permit fee gets associated with it. Mm-hmm. So it's all recorded, but it's not. That's a building permit level. That's not a planning, zoning, bulk kind of site level. Right, those are two very different things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, reading back to a staff analysis that's been given before us, and this is what I go on every time I get a report from the staff, is I'm looking at percentages, and generally I'm looking at that staff report with some real meat and bones behind it, not second guessing what it is. It's about what's recommended and what's not recommended. This is their job. This is not my job. There you have it. I'm getting frustrated here, guys. So sorry if I am.
No, I think that's a good point. And I'd actually, the term common sense to me is what's so important, and it was brought up by Ken Jacobs, at the beginning in public comment. So that includes, wise use of resources and energy efficiency, right? And to me, if somebody comes with a 6,000 square foot house in this day and age for two people, it's not an appropriate development. And the trees on this site are a big deal. How do you work around those trees, and how do you deal with the slope and the off-haul, a balanced grading approach? All of that is up to the applicant to come forward with a really good project and us to judge it there. And I think there's enough good analysis from the staff, as Carrie just said, and zoning requirements that a good appropriate development can be done for this site. For us to give it a square footage number does not necessarily in the spirit, I think, of what we want to do.
Thank you, Lars.
Also, I think we have to be clear about if an ADU is attached, for example, do we count that as, obviously we count that as separate square footage, even though it's attached. There needs to be some clarity about that so that people don't just wander around wondering what to do.
Yeah, I think the square footage, the ADU square footage would be counted as separate, whether it's attached or detached. It would be separate from the maximum size of the house.
Well, it's separate square footage, but to Christine's point, it's if it's attached, it's bulk of the building. So you look at it differently. If it's separate, it's going to have a very different character on the site.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the square footage thing, I think that we are our hand is kind of forced to put some sort of square footage number associated with this M8, is it not? To determine what is meant by shall not exceed those of similar homes. I mean, how do we get around that if we don't start attaching some real numbers to it? I mean, don't we end up in the same situation?
That's why we're here tonight.
What did you say, Carrie? I couldn't understand
I said that's kind of why we're here tonight. They tried to do that to us in the last meeting with
Yeah.
our applicant, and we didn't know quite how to do that. So we're here to do that apparently tonight. I told, yeah, my comment in the last meeting was, okay, what more information are we given to make these valuations realistic? And we're given similar information. So that's why I kind of went back to my initial staff calculated square footage, between 125%, 150% on a high end or an average or such. So do we want to give that recommendation tonight? Does this board really want to give that recommendation?
Okay, if I'm understanding you correctly though, Carrie, are we talking about that 150% of the largest number?
Mm-hmm.
I.e. the house can be 150% bigger than 33,732 square feet? I would say that goes definitely against the intent of M8 entirely.
And I would agree with you,
Christine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I thought it was 150% of
Maybe
the
that
average.
maybe that number is attached to some sort of maybe one of these numbers or these percentages is attached to some sort of an average, not a high end.
Yeah.
Well,
And interestingly enough, if you attach the 150% to the average, you get approximately 3,600 square feet.
That's what I got as well.
Yeah.
So to me, that's where I'm really trying to get to right there is, are we just going to say 150% on the average? It's 3,660 square feet, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
But that still begs the question of where the 150% came from. We don't know because it was somebody's feeling that would be good, but we don't have those people there to ask if there's any, basis for that besides just somebody's feelings.
Oh, if we look at like what Larry said about M8, that it's not to exceed, we could say it's not to exceed 3732.
Right.
In addition, it also said that that it's understanding that these homes could add an addition at any time and also increase over time. But again, that would also probably go before planning, staff, and such. So there are alterations to that. It just, again, would need to meet another sense of approval.
Yeah, I think in trying to keep with the sort of the general spirit, I think I'm still getting back to the general spirit of M8. And I think that the general spirit and intent of M8 is to kind of keep everything in there sort of the same size and the same look. That seems to be the intent. So I would be looking at maybe more like 125% of the average increase. That kind of gets us at the high end of the homes that are there without the outlier. Yeah, that gets us at the high end of the homes in that neighborhood, throwing out the outlier. Which I think is reasonable.
I like what you're saying. I agree with that. But also, the extra things like garage and workshops and so forth, that could be a judgment call in design review, doesn't it? Or not?
Well, I think that's another discussion we need to have is what is included in this number.
Right, because if we just
okay,
punt,
let's look at the neighborhood here, for example. in this neighborhood, do we have 3-car garages? Do we have detached garages? Do we have attached garages? I don't know the answer to this question. I suspect we do not have 3-car garages. I mean, that's a look. A 3-car garage is a look. It's a feeling. You get to a 4-car garage. I'm trying to establish the intent of this M8, which is to keep the neighborhood in its character. I think that was the intent of M8. So like if I had a 3,000 square foot house or a 2,000 square foot house and a 5-car garage, I do not think that would be characteristic of the neighborhood by any stretch of the imagination. So, I mean, I think like a 2-car garage is kind of more of an average, sort of a thing that might be attached to a house. 2-car garage. 22 by 24-ish. But I don't know the neighborhood well enough. Is this normal? I would say that this is probably certainly not exceeded in this neighborhood anywhere.
Yeah, there are a couple 3-car garages in that neighborhood, kind of up at the top of, up at the top of First Street. There's a private street that takes off to the west. After you go around the bend there, that's got, I don't know, 4 or 5 fairly new homes on it. And there's one good sized home right on First Street, right around the bend, that has a 3-car garage.
And that's in the 650 foot limit, Ted?
Yeah, it's on that diagram off of on First Street. It's the bottom left 4 parcels. Those are all kind of bigger homes. I'm guessing our outlier home is the lowest left. There's a biggie right there. And those are all fairly new construction. And I think you've got a mixture of 2- and 3-car garages. But yeah, I think 3-car garage is definitely an unusual thing in the neighborhood, and not unheard of, but they do exist.
So again, they could be the outlier. I guess where I'm going is like, similar homes. Like how many? I mean, we could mince this down. We could be here till midnight. But if you have similar homes, then I would ask myself the question, in order to determine what would be normal, how many homes are we talking about in this 650 foot radius, and what are, again, the garages, what's typical, not what's outlying.
Yeah. Well, and for that reason, if you took your 125% and that got you to 3,100 square feet, and you said, okay, a shop and a garage can be another 500 square feet, and now you're kind of at the 3,600 square foot mark again.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know what these numbers include. These numbers that we have on the chart with the square footages.
Right.
If you have an attached garage, this is a question for John. Did those numbers include the attached garage?
I don't know.
We're not sure.
I can't say for sure whether it does or does not include that number within the square footage that's given from the GIS parcel tool. Greg?
I can tell you with 100% certainty that is conditioned square footage that is listed on GIS. I verified multiple homes, and that is how everything, real estate, everything is referred to conditioned square footage 100% of the time. Thank you.
All right, so my feeling is, I'd be happy to take the 150% of the average and or cap it at 3,700 square feet and just say, okay, it can be similar to the largest home. You know, I don't think that would be unreasonable. I don't see going in excess of the largest home, because I don't think that meets the intent of M8. I think M8 certainly wasn't going there. It was going, it needs to fit in somehow.
Mhm.
And being on the large, in my opinion, I guess being on the larger size seems to fit that intent. If anything, we would want to err on the generous side, I would think.
Where does that throw in lots of square footage of storage, workshop, all attached, et cetera, where you could substantially increase that number with all this other quote unquote non-conditioned stuff? I'm leaving the garage separate from this, by the way, but there's other types of rooms that could obviously later, I mean, they're just going to increase the bulk. I mean, you normally, when you're looking at your house, you've got your bulk of your house in your garage.
Yeah. You know, ideally, I think we'd pick a number that was all inclusive and just say total square footage, inclusive of garages, shops, unconditioned airspace, and not be ambiguous about it.
Yeah, but we can't do that with the data that we have.
Yeah.
So it seems to me we can say, you know, it's 3,700 is a number we've been sort of given, but we don't know. I mean, Gregory's given, you know, he's chimed in on that would in that comment that would be 3,700 conditioned space.
Mm-hmm.
We could then do another survey. Someone could, whatever. Oh, in this 650 foot radius, the garages are X, or, you know, typically the average of unconditioned space is 500 or 200 or 10,000 or whatever. We don't have that data though.
Larry, you have your hand up.
You can ask the applicant to do that analysis. You can tell the applicant how you're going to interpret it, and then you can have the applicant do that analysis. I agree. I don't think you have the data tonight to exactly figure out an exact square footage, because you need to compare apples to apples, and you don't know what the apples are of the structures that were averaged out at 3,732 square feet. Do they include garages, workspaces, et cetera, et cetera? You need to compare apples to apples, but you don't necessarily need to do that work. You can tell the applicant how you're going to interpret it and ask them to bring you the data back to justify whatever project they bring you in the future. You can tell them how you're going to interpret it and expect them to show you that it meets that criteria when they come back.
Okay.
And they've certainly, applicant has done a lot of research, as we saw, and looking at all the different photos and so on, that it seems like it would not, you know, it wouldn't be that much extra work to just limit the area and, you know, put that in a spreadsheet or whatever. I mean, I guess unless it's, you know, knocking on people's doors or looking up old drawings, if it's not what's on the GIS.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd like to go back to the M8 one more time, if you don't mind. So we're talking about the size of the homes, not the conditioned square footage of the homes. And I can see that the intent of this is not to have really large buildings. So I could see a situation where you had a building size total bulk, and you might have additional structures for these other uses, such as a workshop, or maybe you have your size and you've got the garage, which is detached, but you're reducing the monolith that you're creating by limiting the size. not the conditioned square footage, the size. That's what it says there. So I just think that's an important consideration when you get back to the intent of M8, which is to keep the neighborhood, you know, in its character. I think that's the intent here. Size, bulk, monolith.
Great, go ahead.
Mine, thank you, I appreciate it. I was just gonna say that, so short of knocking on doors, where is this information available? Because I've never seen, except for maybe confidential tax records, additional information about the size of a home that is anything other than the conditioned square footage. That is why we're not trying to push and create boundaries that are to make Greek temple here. The problem here and the confusion before is that size was a big question of the previous meeting. And I don't know any other way to do research or define it other than the way real estate, permitting, GIS database, everything is size means conditioned square footage. We're not doing this to trick anything. When we submitted the last plan, I want to make really clear, we weren't even aware of M8. So we weren't trying to trick anything with what was conditioned or unconditioned. I want to make that really clear. When we became aware of M8, size, I don't know another way to define it, and I don't know another way to get data on it to compare. That involve getting out tape measures and going to all homes, which is obviously not an option, especially during COVID and for a number of other reasons. So I just want to like throw that out there. I appreciate you continuing to let me, I really do.
Could I say something?
Yes, please do.
This talks about, M8 talks about recent homes, I guess in the last 20, 30 years. When projects are submitted here, I know in other cities, it works this way. But when you submit a project to planning, you go through that exercise of conditioned and unconditioned spaces and covered porches and so on and so forth. They have a rules for how they're going to interpret your submittal. So can that information not be gotten from the planning department? Since these homes are all in the last 20, 30 years that we're concerned with? Or is that not the case here? Do they not do it that way here?
As far as planning department goes on building permits, it's done through the building department. So we would have to work with the building department to pull the permit applications for each of those homes to see what that number is for each specific home.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. I think that this, because I have submitted many plans and built off of many others' plans, and my father was a land use planner for 30 years, and I've been around this for a long time. How somebody submitting a set of plans determines what to count and not to count, especially outside of conditioned space, which is where the main critical focus is when it comes to fees and size and all those different things, is very inconsistent. And I just want to make sure, once again, I want to reiterate just past here is in our previous projections that I know we realize we made mistakes by blowing everybody's tops off, but we included every eave and deck and porch and everything. And that's typically not the case for building construction permits and different aspects of things. But we took everything as far and literally and specific as possible. But anyways, there's a lot of inconsistency in that data, even if you can find it, if it's even required to include it.
Understood. Okay, so I think we need to kind of get to the bottom of this whole thing.
Okay, I have another comment to make.
All right, go
I
for
think
it.
if we take the average size and add 125% and a 2-car garage, we come up with the 3,700 and change. And I think that would reasonably meet the intent of keeping the size the same. Now, this does not preclude other structures.
Right.
Like I said, reiterate the point again, the intent is to keep I believe reading this, the size and height, to keep it the same, similar to what's there for the home. You can still have the workshop, the detached garage, but if we take the average square footage and we add 125% of that and a 2-car garage, we're going to be right up there at that maximum size that's already recorded in the neighborhood.
Dina, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Just looking for a solution here. I do agree with Mr. Beal. The records there are almost no public records available for unconditioned space. The only source of those records that I know of is the county assessor's office, and those records there are confidential and only available to the landowner. So going back to Larry's suggestion, maybe a solution would be with whatever submittal the applicant makes, we make our best effort to provide readily available public information, which is going to be primarily condition-based because that's what's in all of the public records. But if we can find reliable information about unconditioned space, we could include that if it's available and in a cost-effective and reasonable way. I'm just wondering if that's a reasonable path forward for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that apples and apples. If we only can compare some apples, the apples that we have are based on conditioned space. So to throw a pear in this fruit basket is a bad idea. I think we just stick with just putting down a cap for conditioned space. 125% be 3,750, which was what staff had made available. And we put that as a cap, as a conditioned space. Again, we've talked about the idea of all these languages that MH's trying to provide, but again, it comes back to common sense, guys. We need to put a cap there and look at a project, not just this project, but any project that goes forward with a cap that has multiple facets to it. But how does it really fit and marry a site? That's a big part of what we're doing as a design review board, not sticking to a hold fast number and making a dogmatic solution, right? So again, we've had staff calculated, numbers here. Let's just stick with that. It's what we need to decide on tonight. 3,750. It's 125% of 3,000 square feet. If you want to do 150% on 244 square feet, you could do that. We could do math all night long. But what do we have a chart here, guys. Let's kind of move on this.
Okay. Yeah, I think we keep coming go back to that 3,700 square feet, 3,750, that square footage. And if our 3,732 is conditioned airspace, then our 3,750 should be conditioned airspace. I agree with that. Anybody have a problem with that? Lars, does that make sense?
I think that makes sense, and I appreciate what Tina said about that the applicant, can do some research, and as part of what they bring forward in the next round, it will include some sense of unconditioned space in the area.
Yeah. Christine, does that make sense to you?
Well, I'm a little confused about this. So if we're saying 3,700 square feet, whatever the number, what keeps that building from being 5,400 square feet, we're calling 3,700 square feet conditioned space?
It doesn't, Christine. Sorry, go ahead.
So the house would not be a similar size of the other houses, then it'd be 5,400 square feet.
Well, we don't know that.
As a hypothetical,
We don't know the data of what the other houses are in terms of their overall square footage. We just don't know it. But I think to Carrie's point, we can talk about, we can say the staff has given us this data and we're giving that back to the applicant and asking them to do a little more research and bring forward an appropriate project for us to look at.
Yeah.
I don't know how we can do more than that.
But I think we'd also probably want to say that if unconditioned airspace comes back to us that that exceeds something that's sort of obviously typical to the neighborhood, i.e. a 2-car garage, there needs to be some justification to them to support that. So if somebody's going to come back with 2,000 square feet of shop and unconditioned space, I think the onus would be on them to demonstrate that that's typical to the neighborhood.
And
if they can't
exceed.
Mm-hmm. Here's I think the point that I would like to make on perfectly what you guys are saying is that we have Sebastopol design review guidelines that really give us guidelines, right? I'm on the DRB, I'm looking at guidelines all the time, and this is the Bible in which makes a great project, right? That's what we're here to review. So to me, that's where it really applies. You know, that's where every project that we're looking at, that's where the rubber meets the road for a project. Square footage is a big consideration. There's no question about it. But how it marries a site, all the conditions that are given through these guidelines, they're an enormous guideline for an applicant, you know, and for us. So again, we're trying to get to an apples and apples comparison using common sense. It seems to me that yeah, there's so many variables, and I don't think we can keep going down the variable road without really looking at, you know, the guidelines to protect not only an applicant, but also to protect the neighborhood and everything the guidelines have to say.
Terry, I agree with you on that point, but this particular discussion involves size. M8 is size. You know, so yeah, I agree within the size, those guidelines are very important, but this particular subdivision was developed with an agreement about size. And I think that's what we're discussing for this lot.
And I would agree with you, Christine. I just don't think you're going to fit a 5,000 square foot home on a 1/4 acre lot with setbacks in each direction. It's just not that, it's not applicable. You know, I mean, again, it comes back to all the guidelines that also have that sway in regards to setting a cap, which was something, again, was mentioned earlier. We're looking at a cap. It's not the holy grail here, but it's a cap. It's just a guideline for an applicant.
Yeah, now we did see an application of a 6,000 square foot proposal on this property, right?
Thank you, Ted.
4,500, it was misstated as 6,000, I think. 4,500.
4,500 conditioned.
Yeah, a bulk thing of 6,613 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
So we did see that before. So
But does it fit the significant natural site features? Does it minimize its reflection to topography? Does it meet context of design for impermeable surfaces? Does it meet the massing requirements? I mean, these are guidelines, guys. These are the things that we review when we look at any project of any size, right?
All right, yeah. Yeah, but I guess,
Greg, I see your hand up.
we keep being asked to chime in on this M8 thing, and the big part of M8 is size. So I don't think one precludes the guidelines. The guidelines still apply.
Yeah.
But we're being asked to chime in on exactly what is the interpretation of M8, which is really kind of beyond our normal purview. And I think that's where the discomfort comes.
So what I suggested was the staff report has given us information. We're assuming it's about conditioned space. The applicant needs to use that information. And then, like what Tina suggested, they also come forward with some sort of survey. Doesn't have to be incredibly detailed or whatever, but here's what the unconditioned space kind of generally is in the neighborhood. Therefore, we've come up with this design. Is that not enough to just put that forward as our recommendations?
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the 3750, and the unconditioned space has to be supported by documentation from the neighborhood. I don't have a problem with that. I see hands being raised, and I think we're in the middle of a discussion that we want to kind of stick with here. So we'll get to you in a minute.
I agree with both of you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this 3,700 square feet for conditioned space, then that defies the similar size of the homes. So I think we need to back that down, and I'm willing to take the average plus 125% for the conditioned space. Because that's an outlier. That's not average. That's not consistent with the M8.
Well, the M8.
I don't feel comfortable.
M8 also says not to exceed.
Homes.
Yeah.
Not homes.
Right. Well, but how many homes are that big? Do we have that list?
Yes, we do. That is an outlier. That's why I'm willing to say we take the average of the homes on that list, increase by 125%, a magical number based on feelings. And then we have our unconditioned space on top of that, which is typical of the other unconditioned space in the neighborhood, which is probably garages. There's probably not another 2,000 square feet of other stuff.
Gotcha.
I think it's probably typical.
Christine, or maybe this is a question for John. Do we have the list of homes? Is that, you've mentioned this before, the 3732 is an outlier. Do we have the list?
In the staff report.
Yes.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
What page is that on? I missed the list.
The back, it's on the back of my page 14. So I guess that's 15.
Yeah.
And I believe that's where John came up with his average. John, is that true?
Correct.
In your staff report, you have, yeah, okay. So we take the average, we use the magical feelings number of 125% increase, and then we allow unconditioned space on top of that. But that unconditioned space has to be typical of what's in the neighborhood. A garage, maybe some other items, but typical of what's in the neighborhood. That seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Seems reasonable to me.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like we're in agreement. So we're talking about 125% of the 2440. Is that what we're talking about?
It says around 3,000. And then we have a unconditioned space outside of that. But that unconditioned space must be typical of the neighborhood. However, we're going to determine that.
Right, and the onus is on the applicant to justify that.
Correct.
Right.
And I think that this can be a motion. I think I would like to make this motion.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Now we had, I think we've kind of come here. We've got a couple hands up. Let's hear what some people have to say before we proceed. Tina, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I just want to clarify what I suggested for unconditioned space. And the reason I want to clarify this is that there may not be any public records available to justify this. So we will make our best effort to do that. But if there's no public records, there's no public data, then we're just going to have to say we drove by and counted garages. We don't know if those garages were converted to bedrooms and they're now conditioned space. So I would ask, I don't think this board intends to ask us to do something that is impossible. So I would say, give us a little latitude and let us make our best effort based on publicly available or otherwise reliable data.
Sounds reasonable. Yeah, and I think, at least from my standpoint, it seems like there has to be kind of some common sense in determining that, since we don't have hard, fast data, that, yeah, we're gonna have to drive around the neighborhood and go, okay, I see 2-car garages and occasional 3-car garages. So that square footage that you're proposing seems to make sense in that context. If an applicant comes along with, 2,000 square feet of unconditioned airspace, I think we're all going to go, how is that justified? We don't see that when we drive down the street. And there would have to be some explanation and some justification for that application.
All right, can I say something?
Yeah, please do.
I think there has to be some trust in the design review board now and in the future. And I wasn't hearing a lot of that. I know we have to resolve this, but design review is not going to, I don't think, ever approve a 2-car garage and an additional 1,000 feet of unconditioned space. I think we have to trust them. And then also, secondly, I'd like to say that I thought I heard in the language a little while ago that was being bounced around that we have to not exceed what's existing now. So we cannot exceed 37 something. Now I'm hearing 3,000, and that's a big difference in the design of a home. And I'm not so sure we should just jump to something like that. Can we clarify that a little?
I can clarify that for you, Marshall. The statement in the M8 says the average size or of the homes, not home in the singular. Now 3,700 square feet is an outlier. So the M8 this is not consistent with the M8. It would have to be with the plural. And that's why we're taking the average of the homes within the 650 foot radius and then giving 125% addition to that. Does that make sense?
Greg, I see your hand up.
Was that permission to speak, or were just acknowledgement that it was there? I don't want to interrupt if that was not.
Let me give Marshall one more second to see.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I just realized.
Yeah. Marshall, was there anything else that you wanted to add, or was Christine's? You're muted if. Okay, I don't hear anything else from him. So Greg, go ahead.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. So I think we all want to wrap things up here, and I want to go back earlier, and sorry to do my used car sales waving hands over here, but I just wanted to follow both what Carrie and Ted said earlier. Many points there is that what we're talking about today takes nothing away from the standard process of a design review. Carrie holding up I've been using the same guidelines to when I was on the board and preparing for this meeting. None of that gets diminished or gets taken away. So how you want to judge massing or all those different things still applies, whether it's conditioned, unconditioned, whatever else. tonight we're just trying to talk about M8 to find out if there's anything more unique, specific, or restrictive in M8 than the general review guidelines that you guys normally use. It doesn't mean that we don't go through that same process. This is a process. So I think that I want to take this off the pedestal a little bit. I mean, these things are very important because the language here has significant impact, and I don't necessarily agree with planning or what you guys are coming to, but there will be another chance for us to go over this in a standard meeting. What I'd like to ask / recommend, and I'm going to take my hand down just before I forget when I mute again, is that we don't necessarily, I have concerns about the accuracy of staff's data on what homes they chose to use for this, where they drew their radius from, whether it's from the middle of one property, the edge of another, or whatever else. And so maybe it takes it off the pedestal a little bit. And once again, I don't necessarily agree with what this outcome is, but what if once again, the onus is on the applicant to come back and say, within 125% of average of this, but I think to pick a number from planning's report when I know there's incorrect information in there was comparisons of the data of condition neighboring properties to the total square footage, including everything of ours, to say it's 600% larger and how they chose the homes. I think that feels a little, I think you're sticking, I don't know if we can say that's the exact average number. So if you guys are agreeing on 125% of average per these things, then we can know that's what you're expecting. We'll do our research and present it to you. Here's our radius, here's our average, here's the data we did for this many car garages and size and this things, and this is the way we've interpreted it. And you guys, per any design review board meeting, whether we had M8 or not, could say that house is too big. That's still there. So this isn't taking away from that. So I just wanted to make that clear that this is not taking away anything from a standard process. Once again, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak again. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to speak to this if I may. We have the staff report. That is the data that we have. I believe that you have an appeal period where you can correct that. So I think that we just go on the data that we have now presented by staff. This is not a discussion back and forth with you. And I've made a motion that we condition the size. I can see what you're doing. I made a motion that we condition the size on 125% of the average plus conditioned space, unconditioned space, which is determined later. So I think that was the discussion that we were having where all this other conversation happened.
Yeah, and I agree that we kind of have to work with the data we have. And I don't know that we want to say, 125% of some speculative average that's to be determined later. I think we kind of go with the data we have, and if new data comes along, then new data comes along.
I think we can say that. 125% of the average that we have with the data that we have at this time from the staff report.
Right.
Larry has a comment.
Larry has a comment.
I'd like to caution the board not to talk about appeal periods and the like. As I stated a couple hours ago, this is guidance to the applicant who is going to prepare a new project to meet your consensus developed interpretation of M8. Whether you do that by developing a consensus or by motion, you're giving the applicant general guidance. And there's leeway even in your guidance because you're asking the applicant to bring back additional information that could sway your ultimate opinion. So I just want to caution the board again, that's where you are this evening. And I would suggest just develop a consensus and then keep your open mind when they come back with the project. This has been a very enlightening conversation, obviously. So I think you've made a lot of headway towards being your next analysis, which will have a specific project in front of you.
Sounds good. Let's see, Steve Fabian, your hand's been up for a while. Do you have something you want to
Yeah,
say?
I'd just like to support Ms. Lovell's analysis of what this neighborhood's about. The reality is if we use the biggest house at 3,700 plus square feet as being the maximum that this project can be, if that's what's going to be for this neighborhood, what's going to happen if every house went to that level, the whole neighborhood would be totally different. It would change the whole nature of the neighborhood. And you can't use the biggest house to say this is what the neighborhood, the average of the neighborhood is like. And I think that to set the biggest house as being the average not to be exceeded could change in the future what the whole neighborhood is about, and would really destroy the feeling that the neighborhood has. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Let's see.
I would like to proceed with the motion if possible.
Let's proceed with the motion. Okay, so
Tina has her hand up as well.
all right, Tina, go ahead.
Or we do that.
Okay.
Thank you. Just a suggestion. I'm hearing from some board members a desire for kind of a hard number and percentage. I'm also hearing from Greg that there are mistakes in the staff report. So maybe again, a solution is, the board can, adopt a percentage of whatever, but leave some room for the applicant to come back and say, here's what the board did on January 5th. We voiced concerns about the accuracy of some of the data. We are providing additional data, and just give us some room. If we've got the data for conditioned space, let's bring it back to you and keep an open mind. It seems like that, again, satisfies all of the concerns.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think
that's where we are. We have not. I don't think we're putting a hard cap on. Nobody has suggested that. We're just trying to give some guidance. So at this point, feels to me like the board should move forward. Other comments need to wait till the future.
I agree. All right, so Christine, could you please restate your motion, just so we all understand what we're agreeing to or disagreeing with?
I believe I would like to make a motion that the conditioned square footage of the house be 120, maximized at 125% of the average based on the staff report, and that the unconditioned space, which would be the garage, two-car garage, and other space, will be to determine later based on an interpretation of what's typical of the neighborhood.
Thank you for summarizing that for us. All right, we have a motion. How about a second? Somebody want to second that?
Sure, I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and we have a second. Any additional discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and call the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
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 And Marshall, you're muted, so I'm not sure.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, I'm in favor.
In favor. Okay, so we have 4 in favor. All opposed?
Nay.
Nay. We have 1 opposed. Motion carries. So that is our guidance for today. John, do we have anything further on our agenda?
No, I do not believe we have any other agenda items.
All right. Well, I will thank our applicant. Thank you very much. That was, I think, a good exchange. We appreciate the input from the community.
Thank
And-
you as well. I just want to make sure I really appreciate, this is a difficult conversation and we're all trying to do the right thing. And I really appreciate everybody's time in the late hour. So thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks, everybody. I think without anything further on our agenda, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Ted.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Ted.
you.
Thanks,
everyone.
fellas. Appreciate it, guys.
Bye.